For all the horrors of 40k, there are none quite like the Tyranids. After all, how can you defeat a foe that is simply never ending, and one that can adapt on a whim, so no matter what you throw at it the first time, you might not be so lucky the next. These Xenos swarms devour entire star systems, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. But thankfully, they haven't managed to reach all of the galaxy's inhabitants. At least not yet. Now, with the 4th Tyrannic War in progress, the Imperium is once more pitted against this alien foe, but this time with a son of the Emperor. Though this is a great help to bolster the Imperium's chances, what if the worst was to occur? What if the Tyranids somehow managed to get their claws onto one of the Emperor's sons? What if the Tyranids consumed a Primarch? Very briefly before I get into it, I just want to say that Space Marine 2 is coming out tomorrow, and I shall be streaming it at 6 PM GMT, so if you want to come along and ask me questions or see my reaction to the game, feel free to do so. Also, I'll be talking about the Primarchs in general, so if I say Kurz or some of the other Primarchs, just know that not all of them were around when the Tyranids first made contact. I just want to give you guys an example of something that could possibly happen. I also just want to say thank you for watching, and I shall bother you no more. During the early years of the 41st millennium, the planet Tyran was besieged by an unknown Xenos threat. There were no survivors to tell what horrors they had faced, but unfortunately for the galaxy, it didn't take long for them to know, as the Tyranids made their first appearances en masse. The Tyranids are the Great Devourer. They consume anything and everything biological, from the largest of space whales to the smallest of microbes. They will eat it all and repurpose it into more Tyranids. Entire planets can be used to fuel the Hive Fleet's advances, which is why Inquisitor Cryptman took the extreme steps to slow them down by using exterminatus on several highly populated worlds. Which did work, just at a very heavy cost. But the Tyranids don't just consume the biological matter in order to grow and increase their numbers, they also break down the genetic code of a species and apply it within their own ranks. It matters not the size of the species either. If there is a species or being that is particularly resilient to a type of chemical, should they consume it, they can take that genetic code, then apply it onto the next generation of Nids, meaning that they are now resilient to the chemical. Outside of the lore, you can kind of see this too on the tabletop. Whilst they are older and outdated models, you can actually see some representation of this in their units, such as the Biovols, which were meant to have a genetic link to the Orcs, hence why they have an orc-shaped face and teeth. It essentially boils down to, if the hive mind finds something worth having in the species, they will go out of their way to consume, assimilate, and create new species to bring into their ever-expanding domain. We can see examples of this through the Tyrant Guard and Zoanthropes, and whilst this is just a hypothesis, the Tyrant Guard are said to contain the genetic materials that go into the making of an Astartes, hence their resilience, whereas the Zoanthropes are meant to be made from the genetic structures of the Eldari, which is why they're so psychically gifted. So given that these are the creations from these beings, a Primarch would be a high priority target. And the Tyranids absolutely know that these beings exist, in the 41st millennium at least. And given that most of them are either dead or missing, the main target is more than likely going to be Rabute Guilliman, but we'll talk more about this later. The Primarch's genetic makeup could be considered almost demigod-like, unnatural even. After all, they do have more parts of the Emperor's genetic makeup alongside that of another Perpetuals. Now, the first thought upon hearing this may be that the Tyranids could use the Perpetual Genes. After all, immortal Tyranids sounds like something the hive mind would want, but for all we know, they have already consumed Perpetuals previously. As for some unknown reason, Old One Eye keeps reappearing, even after seemingly being killed repeatedly. This could be the reason why it returns infrequently. Of course, that is just a theory, but even if they haven't, it might not be that simple. Tyranids contain the same knowledge and memories of every other Tyranid before it. It is a hive mind after all, meaning that should one die, it can be replaced almost instantly at little to no cost. And who knows, a Perpetual Tyranid may be more cumbersome than need be, as should it return and not be connected to the Hive Fleet, it will just go feral. But arguably the most useful aspect for the Tyranids to utilise the Perpetual Gene would be to regrow lost limbs. Yet at the same time, this then brings up the issue of what if the branch of Tyranids who have this ability are able to escape from the hive mind's control, or if two hive fleets meet. It would be a nightmare scenario for the Tyranids to deal with, as it's a never-ending battle against their own kind, where once they think they have consumed the other's biomass, it just regrows. It could be interesting to see though, and giving it a name like the Perpetual War could pose some interesting questions. But who knows, it may be a simple issue that the Perpetual Genes in many of the Primarchs are not strong enough, or it may not work on the Tyranids the same way it does on other species, meaning it takes longer for wounds to heal, or maybe they never heal at all. And then there's the option of them just capturing one of the Primarchs, Vulcan specifically, and submitting him to eternal torment as he is forced to be consumed repeatedly at the heart of the swarm. He would become a source of infinite biomass. But we aren't talking about what the Tyranids may do to the Primarchs, so as for the rest of the genetics, let's see where they may be applied. The Primarchs were created using a multitude of different genetic structures that were both natural and unnatural, but even the natural genetics include some peculiarities in some of the Primarchs, such as non-human DNA. Canine to be exact. And whilst it is a certainty that the Tyranids have collected canine genetics before, this new branch may prove to be of interest to them. But what about the standard genetics of the Primarchs? Where would they be applied? A Primarch's strength and intelligence may make regular Tyranid units like the Gorns stronger or have a greater connection to the hive mind, meaning that they would no longer suffer their animalistic behaviours. It may mean that synapse creatures have a greater range or even have stronger psychic abilities. However, the most likely option is that the best genetics are applied to the bioforms that are already excelling in strategy and tactics, and even possibly producing an even greater shadow in the warp. With more efficient neural pathways in the Primarch, the hive mind may take this and apply it to the more intelligent nids, such as the Swarmlord, Norn emissaries, or even the smaller variants, such as the Lictors. These beings are already smart, as Lictors, especially the Death Leaper, have shown great emotional and tactical knowledge when it comes to how they should take down their prey. This could mean that there is no longer a Swarmlord, but that of an evolved one, whether it be stronger, faster, smarter, or all of the above. Imagine a Swarmlord with the psychic prowess of Magnus, or one that is able to hide in plain sight like Corvus Corax. Of course, this is assuming that these genes can be assimilated into the Tyranid ranks, but it does pose some interesting questions about how and where the unique Primarch powers may be placed. Assuming that the Tyranids don't have a sense of foresight, if Comrade Kurz was consumed, could they see into possible futures? Or if they gained a brain structure of Dawn, could they manage to destroy even the greatest of structures in mere seconds by having it mapped out before they even enter said building? There are a multitude of possibilities, but whether or not a Tyranid unit could gain these unique abilities is up for debate. But for the Shadow in the Warp, however, this could be a unique opportunity for the Tyranids. Currently, the Shadow works like a blanket, smothering a vast area to cut off Psykers from the Immaterium. Of course, Psykers can still utilise the warp, just in a very limited degree, and at greater risk of having their minds becoming enveloped with the deafening, unending screech and chitter of near limitless bugs, which would lead them to either die or just go insane. With a Primarch that is especially gifted in Psyker powers such as Magnus, it could mean that instead of a blanket, it is a sheer wall where no Psyker can connect to the Immaterium. Much like how blanks operate, but at a galaxy-spanning scale, almost like a living and moving pariah nexus. Of course, this isn't exactly the same, as it isn't like the blank genes of the Sisters of Silence, but the Shadow in the Warp is not like the blank gene. Think of it instead as a psychic shouting match, and the Tyranids are able to throw their voice louder than the warps. Yet we also need to consider that the Tyranids have consumed entire Eldari craft worlds, including the infinity circuits of the craft world of Malantai, yet the Shadow in the Warp hasn't changed all too much, so it may mean that Primarch's genes don't affect the Shadow all too much either. But then there is the biggest area that their genetics may go. Or rather, the Emperor's genetics. What if the Emperor's genetics were applied to whatever horrors the Tyranids could conjure? If a Space Marine's genetics only contain a mere fraction of the Emperor's, imagine what the Tyranids would do if they got their claws on a less diluted supply. Now, we can make some assumptions, and seeing as to how powerful the Emperor is, it can be assumed as to where they might be applied. An entirely new species that may be akin to the Maleceptors or even a new variant of the Doom of Malantai could be formed. Imagine a Maleceptor the size of a Biotitan and the psychic capabilities to match. or Norn emissaries with powers akin to the gods themselves. It's such an awful thing to imagine how much destruction could be wrought by the Tyranids should this occur, and that is saying a lot considering how much destruction they have already brought to the galaxy. But the thing is, with the majority of the Primarchs that I have been discussing, a lot of them no longer exist in 40k as we know it. They are either dead, missing, or simply weren't around during the time that the Tyranids first emerged. But there is a Primarch right now who is currently alive and facing the Tyranids in the 4th Tyrannic War. What would happen if Rabute Guilliman was defeated and consumed by the Tyranids? Well, on the one hand, we don't have to look very far, as a scenario like this has played out in the game Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. Should you play and complete the Tyranid campaign, you actually get to defeat Guilliman on the Macragge's honour, which means that you get a direct line to Terra itself. And currently, should this occur, it would likely be the same story. But there is one thing that we need to consider when talking about this. How Guilliman is defeated. It could be a simple answer of a swarm of Nids storm the battle barge, in which then Guilliman is consumed in a mere few seconds. But the most horrifying outcome would be, what if a Lictor, or even the Death Leaper, managed to get to him first? Not only would they be able to consume him, they would also gain every single piece of his memory. From the intricate layouts of the Imperial Palace to how every single system and defense works inside of it. They would know every single strategy that the Ultramarines or even any other Space Marine Legion may employ. There are countless options for the Tyranids may be able to gain in knowledge from just a singular source alone. And to be quite honest, it would more than likely be the end of the Imperium as we know it. Now, this isn't to say that the Imperium wouldn't put up a fight, just that their efforts might be futile. And seeing as the Hivemind has a new veritable playground of genetics to play with, it would more than likely produce bioforms that are going to take advantage of the Imperium's many weaknesses. But now I pass this question on to you. How do you think the Primarchs would be utilised by the Tyranids? Do you think they could utilise the powers of the Primarchs, or would it just simply be a new bioform that is created? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Now on that note, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I would like to say thank you ever so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, and I hope you have a good one. See ya!